I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Autoimmune RESET podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist, and expert in autoimmune disease. And today we're going to be talking about the role of testosterone in autoimmune disease and how important testosterone is for your body, because there is this fascinating link between testosterone and autoimmune disease, and people will often think about estrogen and progesterone, especially if you're female, when it comes to managing your sex hormones, rather than thinking about the importance of testosterone, because you might not think much about testosterone, but beyond its link with our sex drive and muscle mass, it has a key role in regulating the immune system as well, and that's especially in women. So in today's episode, we're diving deep into how testosterone, its metabolites and enzymes like aromatase impact autoimmune conditions. And in my clinic, when my clients have low testosterone, they'll present with symptoms like hair loss, blood sugar dysregulation, and they are often in a higher stress state. And we're going to be touching on all those factors in this episode today. We'll also be looking at some cutting-edge research when it comes to testosterone and its effects on autoimmune disease. So if you like the science, you'd like to understand the mechanisms, then I'm going to be going through that at the end, as well as 5 key ways that you can work to increase your testosterone and hopefully feel better and help with your autoimmune symptoms as well. So as you may be aware, autoimmune disease disproportionately affects women, and the one theory behind that is due to the hormonal differences that there are between men and women, and that's particularly the balance between estrogen and testosterone, because I'm sure you will ordinarily associate testosterone with men, but it is equally important with women as well, and that's why I test for it regularly in my clinic with my clients. And you can test for that through doing a hormone panel like the Dutch test, which will show the levels of testosterone, and it can show other markers as well, which I'll be touching on in this episode. But low levels of testosterone can lead to imbalances in immune regulation. It can promote inflammation and an overactive immune response, which we commonly see in autoimmune disease. And testosterone has also been shown to modulate T cells, which are a type of white blood cell, which plays a critical role in autoimmune disease. And I have touched on T cells in earlier podcast episodes as well. When testosterone levels are low, these T cells become dysregulated, and that can increase the risk of autoimmune conditions like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, and I'll be talking more about that later in the episode. So let's talk about aromatase, because one of the major mechanisms behind low testosterone in autoimmune disease is the enzyme aromatase. And if you haven't heard of aromatase, it converts testosterone into estrogen. And this will be visible when I'm doing a Dutch test with a client, because in their results it will show the level of testosterone and the level of certain estrogens, and there is this mechanism where testosterone is converted to estrogen by aromatase, and it's quite obvious by the amount of testosterone that my client has and the amount of estrogen whether this mechanism is in play. When it's overactive, it can significantly reduce testosterone levels, and that's helpful for me, because if I see somebody who has symptoms of low testosterone, they have an autoimmune disease, and then they do the Dutch test, and I see that they have low testosterone but a high amount of estrogen and a high amount of particular type of estrogen, then I know that this is probably what's going on, and then we can do things to address it. And the reason that this is especially problematic for people who have autoimmune conditions is because they already have elevated inflammatory markers, and aromatase activity can further ramp up that inflammation. The other thing about aromatase is that it leads to less free testosterone. So it's not just about the amount of testosterone, it's the amount of free testosterone that's unbound and available for the body to use. You may have heard of this concept when I've been talking about thyroid and thyroid hormones, because it's not just about the thyroid hormones themselves, it's about the amount of free thyroid hormone in the body, because that's what your body uses. And when free amounts of hormones are low, then it is just like having a low amount of that hormone. But it helps, because if you know your total amount of hormone and the amount of free hormone, then again, it gives you an idea of the underlying mechanism. And from a nutritional therapy perspective and as a functional medicine practitioner, that helps me understand, okay, well, if this is the mechanism, then what can we do naturally to help with that and to reverse this happening for this individual? And free testosterone is interacting with your tissues, it helps to regulate immune function, and it helps to reduce inflammation as well. And when it gets converted into estrogen, not only do you end up with less testosterone, but you also have a risk of something called estrogen dominance, which can also exacerbate inflammation and immune dysregulation. And that's what I would ordinarily see: low testosterone and extremely high estrogen. And we're not going to talk too much about high estrogen on the podcast episode today, but when you have high estrogen, it can be turned into certain metabolites. So as part of the detox pathway, it turns into different types of estrogen metabolites, and some of those can be particularly harmful in the body. So that again gives you the information that you need, and it is helpful information because there are things that you can do if you are creating those more harmful estrogen metabolites with diet and nutrition. Testosterone also gets metabolized into dihydrotestosterone, which is often referred to DHT, and that's a potent androgen which is linked to hair loss. So again, if I'm working with somebody with hair loss, they might not have been diagnosed at this point, but they are experiencing hair shedding, they might be presenting with alopecia areata, or they might just have a lot of hair shedding and want to understand the underlying cause. Well, this is a helpful marker because high levels of DHT, especially if your body struggles to clear it properly, can lead to thinning hair, which is a common symptom in my autoimmune clients, particularly those who have conditions like Hashimoto's and lupus. So it's just a really good insight for me because, again, if I know that high levels of DHT are affecting the hair follicles, then I have specific natural therapies that I can recommend for my clients to help with that. Now, I've mentioned the Dutch test a couple of times. So the Dutch test stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones, and it's a test that is a highly detailed assessment of the hormones and metabolites in the urine, and it makes it such a great tool for me to evaluate somebody's testosterone levels, but also their downstream metabolites like DHT. And it also measures both free and metabolized testosterone. So again, it's a helpful indicator of what's going on in my client's body and how I'm able to help. And even if somebody has low testosterone, it will help me get an understanding of which pathway my client's body favors when it comes to DHT, because it can either go down the 5-alpha pathway or the 5-beta pathway, and it gives you that information. So for example, if I'm working with a client who has low testosterone but they are favoring that DHT pathway, I have to bear that in mind, because by increasing their testosterone levels, then that might cause them a problem with DHT. So you have to really take everything on board when you're looking into this. But as a first step, it is just helpful to understand, well, what are your testosterone levels? Is that playing into your autoimmune condition? And what can you do to help that? There is also something called sex hormone-binding globulin, and your doctors may test for this as well. And it's a protein that binds to testosterone in the blood and makes it unavailable for you to use. And when sex hormone-binding globulin levels are high, which can sometimes happen due to chronic inflammation or having high estrogen or a poor liver function, then free testosterone levels drop. And that means there is less testosterone available. And again, the immune system can spiral out of control. And it can be a vicious cycle, because if chronic inflammation is causing the high levels of sex hormone binding globulin, and that means that your testosterone is low, then low testosterone is contributing to inflammation, but you also have the chronic inflammation that was there before. And again, you have to dig a little deeper. And when I am running a Dutch panel, I may also be looking into my clients' gut health, their cellular health, because as much as hormones being in balance can be a key factor in how you're feeling and your symptoms, often the underlying cause is linked to something like gut health or your liver health or something going on at the cellular level. And it's for me as a detective to go in and understand what that is. In women, the sex hormone binding globulin does tend to increase with age, but factors like stress and insulin resistance and elevated cortisol can also increase your sex hormone binding globulin. And I have been working with a lot of men recently who have low testosterone, and one of the ways that we will start working together is to really work on their stress response, because that will have a knock-on effect to their sex hormone levels. So rather than just focusing on the testosterone itself, we focus on the stress response, because that is probably one of the main contributing factors to their low testosterone in the first place. So even if your testosterone levels look normal on a lab test, if your sex hormone binding globulin levels are also high, then your free testosterone is likely to be inefficient, and that may be contributing to your immune system issues and also symptoms like fatigue and hair loss. So I've touched on the fact that blood sugar regulation, cortisol, and something called the Cortisol Awakening Response can be linked to testosterone. And that's because low testosterone doesn't just affect immune regulation, it's also closely linked to blood sugar regulation. And that's because testosterone helps with insulin sensitivity, meaning it can help your cells use glucose more effectively. And that's what you want. There is something that I refer to with my clients called carbohydrate intolerance. And it's when your tolerance to carbohydrates goes down lower and lower and lower. And that means that when you eat any form of carbohydrates, you end up crashing after eating them. And it's something that happened to me. I would go out for my lunch. I'd be feeling probably not the best, but okay at that point. It's when I had chronic fatigue syndrome. And then after lunch, about an hour after lunch, I would crash. And it was to the point that I felt like I could hardly keep my eyes open. And that's when we have carbohydrate intolerance. And it's to do mainly with your cells rather than the food that you're eating, because for the most part, we should be able to eat carbohydrates and regulate our blood sugar. Obviously not high sugar foods or ultra processed foods, but you should be able to eat carbohydrates and not have an issue. And if you are having an issue with eating carbohydrates, then it's worth looking into your hormonal health and your cellular health, because that's going to give you some clues of why that is happening. But testosterone helps to improve that insulin sensitivity at the cellular level, and that's how you regulate your blood sugar. So by improving your testosterone levels, you can also improve the way that you are able to regulate your blood sugar and help with any crashes in energy that you might be having. When testosterone levels are low, insulin resistance becomes more likely, which as I said, not only affects your energy, but it can affect your weight as well, because when your blood sugar levels are high, it means that you are not going into that fat burning mode where you're using the energy that you already have. You are just in that state of storage rather than burning. And by improving your blood sugar regulation, you can improve your weight as well. But weight in and of itself can be an issue when it comes to your health, because we mentioned aromatase earlier. Well, aromatase is a enzyme which is produced by the adipose tissue, and if you have more adipose tissue, you're more likely to be creating more aromatase, and that means you're converting more testosterone to estrogen. And I'm making it all sound very complex, and you may be thinking, gosh, it's all such a vicious cycle, where do I start? And the truth is, it is best to start in a very simple way and to address one key area when it comes to your health, work on that, see improvements, and then work on the next thing. And the thing I see quite often in my clinic is when I'm working with clients, I will prepare a protocol for them which is focused on one key area. I'll probably be focusing on a few other things as well, but making it quite simple and practical to follow so that we start seeing results. And it's very easy for you to feel like you want to do everything at once and start bringing in other nutrients, start bringing in other supplements. But the truth is, when you take it in a more structured way, that is really when you're going to see those long-term results when it comes to your health. Because if you try and do everything at once, well, sometimes some nutrients can interact with each other, so you're not getting the main benefit out of doing that. But sometimes you need to address a certain system first as well. For example, you might need to work on the gut before even thinking about your hormones, because if your gut is out of balance, then it may mean that you're reabsorbing certain hormones. It might mean that your gut is impacting your liver, and your liver is so important for your hormones. And it might mean that you're not absorbing your food properly and your nutrients, and that can have an impact in your hormones as well. So without addressing your gut health, then you're not going to be able to address your hormonal health. And that's really what I'm doing when I'm doing a health assessment for a client, is understanding, well, what's going to make the biggest difference in the shortest time? Let's work on that first, and then we'll work on these other factors. As I mentioned, the stress hormone cortisol plays a really interesting role when it comes to your hormones, because chronic stress, as you may know, leads to high cortisol levels, and that suppresses testosterone production. So if you are living in a state of chronic stress, then your testosterone is much likely to be lower. It's not always the case, but that's the other great thing about the Dutch test. It also looks into your cortisol levels. So if somebody's testosterone is low, and when I'm looking at their cortisol response, it is high, then it's pretty likely that cortisol is a contributing factor in their low testosterone. But cortisol also stimulates aromatase activity. So as we discussed, if testosterone is quickly converted into estrogen, then you're not getting the benefit of the testosterone you're producing. But that is also intensified when you are in a state of chronic stress. So the combination of high cortisol and low testosterone is creating that perfect storm for immune dysfunction. Now, one key part of cortisol regulation, which again is tested in the Dutch test, is the Cortisol Awakening Response, which is often referred to as CAR. And normally your cortisol levels actually spike 30 minutes after waking up. And that helps you to feel more alert and energized. And if you're not feeling like that, again, it might be a sign that there is some form of dysregulation in your stress response. But in people with chronic stress or autoimmune disease or hormonal imbalance, the response can become blunted or even exaggerated. And when your CAR is out of balance, if cortisol levels are elevated for too long, or they just don't rise enough at all, it can suppress testosterone production, it can lead to low energy, it can lead to increased inflammation and actually poor blood sugar metabolism as well. So that spike in the morning is absolutely key. And to get your circadian rhythm regulated again, if you're not feeling like that after waking up, is to go outside in the morning. It's one of the main recommendations that I make for my clients, because it can make such a big difference. Is when the sun rises or when you wake up in the morning, is to go out in those first 30 minutes. And I know it's not as easy in the autumn and winter time, but if you take have a nice warm jacket to put on, if you take a cup of tea outside and just make sure that that light touches your eyes, that is going to help regulate your circadian rhythm. It's going to help with the cortisol awakening response, and it's going to make sure that your body knows that it is time to wake up and it is the morning time. And that just very, quick practice that you can do on a daily basis can make a big difference, and it's completely free. So now let's talk about some of the science behind this, because research has shown that testosterone has these anti-inflammatory properties when it comes to the immune system. And it's because it can inhibit the production of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. And cytokines are chemicals that can trigger inflammation. And they help to promote the activity of regulatory T cells, which are the immune cells that keep everything in check. And we need to make sure that when we have an autoimmune disease, we are thinking about our regulatory T cells, because they're an extremely important part of the immune system when it comes to an autoimmune disease, because it means that T regulatory cells help to ensure that your immune system isn't attacking self-tissue. And one study found that men who had lower testosterone levels were actually more likely to develop autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. So it's worth checking your testosterone levels if you have either of those conditions. Another study showed that women who had autoimmune conditions were more likely to have lower levels of free testosterone compared to a healthy control. And even when total testosterone levels were similar, it was to do with the amount of free testosterone, which again is why it's so important not just test your testosterone levels, but to also understand what your free testosterone levels are as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I have talked about this in another podcast episode, but testosterone also influences the balance between our Th1 and our Th2 immune response. And a lot of the research suggests that the Th1 response is more beneficial when it comes to immune reactions, because the Th1 cells promote cell-mediated immunity, while the Th2 cells drive antibody production. And many autoimmune diseases, as I'm sure you're aware, are characterized by an overreactive Th2 response, which leads to the production of these autoantibodies that attack self-tissue. And what testosterone can do is help to shift the balance to that Th1 response, which can hopefully reduce the severity of an autoimmune reaction. So what can you do if you suspect low testosterone is contributing to your autoimmune symptoms? Well, I really think it's worth testing to understand what your levels are, and understanding your free testosterone levels, your SHBG levels, and your cortisol pattern. So understanding whether you are having that spike in the morning and what your cortisol levels are throughout the day as well, to understand whether that might be a factor. But I also wanted to share with you 5 practical recommendations to help improve your testosterone levels naturally as well. So firstly, it's looking at ways to reduce chronic stress. And obviously this is easier said than done. But as we know that chronic stress can suppress testosterone production, incorporating daily stress reduction activities can really help. I have started using the NeuroSim recently. I have noticed such an improvement when it comes to my stress levels, which I also track in my Oura Ring. But I am planning to work with NeuroSim because I think it's such a good add-on to my services. It is a device which helps to stimulate your vagal nerve and helps to promote your vagal tone. And as a result, it promotes a calming effect in your body, which is a long-lasting effect. I mean, when you're using it, you feel particularly calm. And actually for me, I feel very focused. So I use it when I'm writing my client plans, or when I'm writing an article, or when I'm currently working on another project, which I'm doing a lot of writing for. So when I am using it, it really helps bring down my response. But there are lots of other things that you can do to help with stress reduction as well, such as meditation, deep breathing exercises, or yoga. And you have to find what works for you. I mean, I actually love all of those, but it's just finding the time in my day to incorporate them. I think deep breathing is a really easy thing that you can do, and you can add it into your day in 5-minute segments. But the thing I really love about the NeuroSym, which I'm using at the moment, is that I can use it when I'm doing other things. And yes, I'm sure you will get an even bigger benefit if you are sat there relaxing while using it, but you can also use it when you are working or when you're watching television. And I actually quite crave it now. So that is just something to think about, and I'll put the link to that in the show notes. But you can also engage in regular resistance training, such as weightlifting. Some studies have shown that compound exercises like squats and deadlifts and bench presses can significantly boost testosterone production. And it's something that I am focused on at the moment. I have been doing a lot of running this year, and I love running, but I have to say, I absolutely love weightlifting, and it's something that I am going to be devoting more of my time to over the winter months. But when it comes to weightlifting, obviously not everybody is going to be able to lift weights, especially if you have any mobility issues or you have any type of joint issues or arthritis. So obviously work within your own limits, but even lifting light weights is going to be helpful as well. Next, when it comes to testosterone, is to make sure that you are prioritizing your sleep. And I am sure if you're listening to this podcast, it's something you're already doing. But poor sleep is linked to lower testosterone levels. And I think the first thing is just to really reflect on your sleep patterns, how well you're sleeping. I honestly found that by tracking my sleep, it helps me improve it. And clients who will buy an Oura Ring will often say, I had no idea that my sleep was so disrupted, because I would get to sleep easily and I didn't realize during the night how restless it was or how little deep sleep I was getting. So I think the first thing to do is monitor it and reflect on it, and then you can find ways to optimize it. It's going to be different for everyone. For me, I take certain nutrients before I go to bed. I like to have collagen and cranberry powder. I take L-theanine and magnesium, and that really helps me get into a lovely deep sleep. I use a weighted blanket. I make sure that the room is extremely dark. So they are my things that really work for me, and reading before bed. But you need to find what's going to work for you. You might find that doing some deep breathing or some calming activities before you go to bed can help. I actually also find that wearing my blue light blocking glasses is really helpful. So over time, I've developed ways to keep improving my sleep, and I feel now that my sleep is as good as it's ever been. I'm sure there's probably still work to do, but that's just something to work on over time, and that can really help with your hormones generally, but also your testosterone levels. When it comes to your diet, zinc and magnesium are two of the minerals which are critical for testosterone production, and zinc is included in things like beef and pumpkin seeds and chickpeas, and if you're feeling fancy, oysters. But magnesium is found in leafy greens, nuts, seeds and dark chocolate. And it has been thought that sometimes when we're craving these foods, are we craving them because we are craving the minerals or craving the vitamins? And you see that a lot with dark chocolate. When people are craving dark chocolate, is it because they are magnesium deficient? And a lot of the time people are magnesium deficient. Well, that's what I'm seeing in my clinic anyway. You should also avoid any processed foods or excess sugar, because that can lead to insulin resistance and again reduce testosterone levels. So as always, when it comes to your diet, be looking at your plate. You want at least half of the plate full of those healthy vegetables and a nice amount of colour. If you can have 3 different coloured vegetables on your plate, then that's a great thing to be aiming for. Making sure that a quarter of your plate includes proteins, and then you have some healthy fats on there like avocado or extra virgin olive oil. And that is, absolutely key when it comes to your health. You can use an app like MyFitnessPal to just make sure that you're getting enough of these key nutrients. And that particularly is important when it comes to fiber, because I feel like when we're focused on our diet and our health, you might have eliminated certain carbohydrates or certain foods. And as a result of that, you may find that your fiber levels are low. And just generally, when I'm working with clients, they will have a pretty good diet for the most part. But what I see lacking a lot of the time is fiber. And it's so important for your gut health as well. And that is a key player in your hormones. I haven't got into the nitty gritty when it comes to your gut health and your hormones, but there are many different reasons that an imbalanced gut can lead to hormonal imbalance as well. And maybe I will save that for another podcast episode and we can talk about that. And then just making sure that you are limiting alcohol and other endocrine disruptors, because excessive alcohol, especially beer, can increase estrogen levels and reduce testosterone, which is quite funny really, because we always think of beer as a man's drink. Well, I generally do. Most men I know will like to drink beer, whereas not as many women do. But it can cause this increase in estrogen levels. So limit alcohol to moderate levels. I always think that with alcohol, it's not, as long as you have a healthy relationship with it, it's more to do with moderating your alcohol intake than having to remove it completely. I think if you are really getting focused on your health, then going alcohol free can make a huge difference, especially if you've drank a lot of alcohol in the past. But just making sure that you moderate it to a couple of glasses of wine a week. That's the way that I personally do it at the moment. I have had long stretches without alcohol, but I find that moderating really works for me now. Looking back in the past, I probably didn't have the best relationship with alcohol, because when you're working in large corporates and socializing a lot, you can end up going out 4 to 5 times a week. And even if you're moderating your alcohol intake, that could still be 3 glasses of wine every night. I felt that by doing that long stretch of not drinking, it made such a big difference in my health, and actually it reset my relationship with alcohol as well. But additionally, reducing exposure to those endocrine disrupting chemicals like BPA, which is found in plastic, and phthalates, which are found in personal care products. And they can mimic estrogen and can lower testosterone levels as well. So always try to opt for glass or stainless steel containers and choose natural products as much as possible. And you can go onto the Environmental Working Group's website to check whether you have any chemical exposure in your self-care products. So here are a few ways that you can help to increase your testosterone levels. I'll be honest, there's often more to it, but understanding where your levels are is a really great starting point to understand whether that might be a factor in your inflammatory symptoms. So low levels of testosterone, high aromatase activity, elevated sex hormone-binding globulin, and cortisol imbalances all contribute to this hormonal environment that promotes autoimmune flares. So managing testosterone levels and supporting cortisol regulation, especially through stress reduction and blood sugar balance, can make such a difference in your autoimmune health. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to pop over to my Instagram account, which is at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist, and you can ask me any questions over there. You can also join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum, which is a community of individuals with chronic illness and autoimmune disease, and we are sharing lots of experiences and information over there to help you manage your autoimmune condition so that you can find ways to reverse your symptoms and feel better, and also have that support with people who are going through the same things that you are going through. And I know, looking back, I wish I had a community like this when I was going through my autoimmune conditions, because it just wasn't a thing back then. And really, by understanding other people's experiences and knowing that you're not alone is a major factor when it comes to these conditions. And then lastly, if you would like to explore testing to find out whether hormonal imbalance is a factor in your autoimmune condition, then you can do my hormone functional testing package, which includes the Dutch Plus, which I will link to in the show notes. But feel free to reach out to me and book a free discovery call as well if you would like to learn more about my services. Again, the link will be in the show notes. If not, have a fantastic rest of your week and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.